be fine. We'll just talk and we'll be
Yeah,
good.
don't try to not making it that serious as it's supposed to be. Because I find that the more relaxed people are, the more engaging the audience is. And I think we are live officially. All
Okay.
right, so let me give this a minute. All right, so we are live, and because we are live, we're early, we're about 4 minutes early, according to my clock here. So I'm gonna get everyone to come together, and I'm gonna start to share so that people can join us wherever they are. Yeah, I don't get everyone to come together. Okay, that's my other thing. So let me do the share into groups as we speak. All right, let's get all the different groups to talk. Experience Africa, I'm lost. If you're just joining us, we are about 3 minutes early, so we're just trying to queue in everybody. I want to welcome you wherever you are. If you're in the United States, I know you're probably having a heat wave like we are. If you are anywhere across Africa, you're also having a different kind of heat wave, except if you're in the southern part of Africa. And then if you are everywhere else in the world, I appreciate your time and I want to thank you for coming in. Um, I know I have been MIA, as someone called me today, because I have not been doing my weekly art talks. Um, it's been busy, like, supremely busy. I mean, it's a good thing, but some days you wake up and you're like, can I catch my breath? Can I catch my breath? All good things, all good things. Be the change. All right. We're still 2 minutes early, but I'm going to start. Good day or good evening. For some of you, it's about midnight. And for a lot of you, it's about between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. I'm in the New York City area. This is Atim, Annette, Oton from Calabar Gallery, and welcome to Art Talks, Dialogues with Artists and Creative People. Today, I have a kind of a good friend. I call her my sister from another mother because it's been quite a very interesting relationship. But first, let me introduce you, Nana Nkweti, who is a Cameroonian author and writer, who is also a professor at the University of Alabama. And we've known each other for almost more than 20 years. You started by working with my brother, who ran a magazine called The African. So it's interesting how paths and lives evolve across the diaspora in different ways. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Atim. Like you're saying, we come full circle, right? I was working with your brother Edinam, and I hope he's tuning in from Nigeria, and that international man of mystery that he is. And he put me on so long ago as a writer, and I was so interested in what he was trying to do, which basically what you're doing is just making a space for art and other narratives coming from people in the diaspora on the continent. So the same thing you're doing with art and placing African artists and African diaspora artists at the forefront. That's what Adina was doing in the world of literature, culture for the African. I remember I interviewed shoe cobblers and Ethiopian models and all these various types of people who were living like the diaspora dream, but their stories weren't being told. And that's what the African magazine and all the wonderful people I worked with, and that's what they gave me as a writer and then later on as an editor. So I feel so blessed to come back here and kind of come back to the African full circle and my extended African family through you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I know you as someone who worked with him. I didn't really know your story in this different sense. My brother was a collector of Africans globally. So similar. I think I am that. But what is your story? Who are you? You're Cameroonian, you're a writer, you're a professor. Take me back to where were you born? Talk about your lineage, your parents, talk about some of your influences. Tell me a story as you would tell me stories as a
Sure.
writer.
So I call myself Cameroonian American because I believe that honors both sides of my heritage. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. I've fortunately lived in chocolate cities all my life. So I was born in DC, and it was like Black History Month was every month. And then I lived in Africa, in Yaoundé, Cameroon, from ages 14 through 18. Then I came back to go to college. So that Cameroonian American lineage, that sense of Black identity, that sense of myself as a global Black citizen was rooted in me very, very early on. Um, I grew up knowing, that like African literature existed in the world. My father's library was full of African greats. We had Chinua Achebe, we had Ngugi wa Thiong'o, we had Ferdinand Oyono. So that was kind of like my upbringing in African literature. And then, and I was also just like a big nerdy person who was reading sci-fi and fantasy as a young child. I was reading, I'm actually just seeing my Watchmen. I teach Watchmen and graphic novels. I also was reading all those grades that we learned, did in GCE in Cameroon, which is a lot of those British classics. So those canonical things have also influenced me. So my understanding of like African literature, my understanding of Western literature has
Mm-hmm.
all come from kind of being a mixture of all these things, growing up as a child who loved to read.
Mm. So you grew up in DC. What school did you go to? And what brought you to New York?
Oh, I went to Ann Beers Elementary School. I had to walk past the mayor's house at the time. Mayor Marion Barry was the mayor at the time, and it was like a sense of real pride, like knowing that he lived in the neighborhood, and that knowing that your mayor was Black. So I used to walk to school, and then I ended up going to Cameroon when I was 14 because I was very much interested in getting to know that part of my heritage. My parents had kept Cameroon alive for me through stories. I'd been there when I was very young, but I knew that if I didn't go then, like my parents were like, "Oh, you're almost at college. You don't need to come back home." And I was like, I think this is the time for me to come back home because who knows when I'll get a chance to really live there. So I moved to Cameroon when I was 14 and lived there from ages 14 through 18. I call that my Dickensian years because it was the best of
Mm.
times and the worst of times. I went from taking seventh grade Spanish to being thrust into Francophone Africa, spoke not a lick of French, not a lick of French. And so it was just interesting going to taking 7 classes to 13 classes and basically was just put into that whole GCE system. That GCE system is a trip because in Cameroon at the time, I don't know if they still do that now, but back then, if you passed or did not pass, they used to announce it on the public radio. So the national radio, everybody, every auntie, every uncle, everybody, and your enemies, your best friends, everybody knew whether you had passed in Nana Nkweti passed in 4 papers. Nana Nkweti failed. So it was just like that. So so thankfully I made it through. I made some great friends and got a chance to really connect with my own heritage, my family, who had up till then really been like, people and pictures in albums, right?
Mm.
So I
Okay.
got to really get a sense of what Cameroon meant for me. And then I came back to the States to go to college at age 18. I was initially in New Jersey and going to Rutgers University for undergrad, and then ended up coming to New York to go to graduate school the first time around. So I think that's when Ed and I met me right after I had gone to law school. And I was like, man, I went to law school for my parents because, as I say in my book, African parents, they know lawyer, doctor.
Yes.
What's the last one?
Oh, engineer,
Hey,
accountant.
I don't even have to tell you. So I don't even have to tell you. Like, so in at that time, now they even saying like, accountant or computer sciences or whatever
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
But at that time when I was going, like it was lawyer, doctor, engineer, right? So
Yeah.
I mentioned that in my book. I call that the high holy trinity of professions that is are blessed by African parents, right? So that was my upbringing, like, and your brother met me when I was just like, I want to be a writer. And like, and my parents were really lovely. They were the one putting that pressure on me to go to law school. It was just like, it was societal.
Sorry.
I'm
Yeah.
the firstborn of like, immigrants. And, you have that sense that that's the right path. And, you don't want your siblings to suffer. I'd actually gone to nursing school first when I came back to America, and then going to college so that I could work as a nurse the entire time I was in college, pay the mortgage on my family's house, and bring my siblings back to America. So you see what I'm saying? This is like
Yeah.
that died in the womb, first child, firstborn kind of energy, right?
Yeah.
So that was my upbringing. And for me to actually privilege my writing, your brother was very instrumental, and the African magazine was very instrumental in me saying, man, maybe I can actually do this as a profession. So I started writing those articles and learning that, I'd always been writing short stories on the side, but like doing things in a professional manner where I actually was like on a deadline and feeling, more comfortable that this is something that I could, actually potentially make a living doing. So I think he was very much, and the African magazine were very much a part of that particular journey for me. So that was my New York saga, coming to New York for one thing, and then ending up as a writing professional, and then going back because once again, I still am my firstborn Pekin. I say I want to be a writer. I got to go get degree, so I went.
Yes. Well, yeah, you ended up. That's the
Yes.
transition from New York to Iowa, I
Yes,
presume.
because honestly, like, did I really need a degree? But no, not necessarily. But I'm still an African daughter and firstborn, so I went back to Iowa, and got my MFA in writing from the Iowa Writers Workshop. And honestly, I feel like even if I didn't need to, because I've always been writing since I was 9 years old, since I was a kid. But I'm still happy that I took that time to kind of take a breath from being a working professional and just focus on writing. And being in Iowa is a place where it's like Iowa is a world city of literature. They have, so many writing programs, and their focus is on elevating the written world. So
Yeah.
being in that space where, where that kind of dialogue was happening, I grew as a writer, being in that space where I didn't have to work. They literally, they support you and give you stipends, and you just focus on writing. I mean, that was such a gift. And that's something that I'm hoping as my platform grows that I can do. And I've given money to organizations on the ground back home, and working, in talks with an organization called Bakwa Books, and they're wonderful in Cameroon. But like Bakwa Books is doing some of that work where, just making a space and workshops, a space for African writers to come and say, hey, this is not, I don't have to, I can privilege writing as a real and serious, vocation. And that's what I'm very, very, very interested in. And that's what Iowa gave me.
So, where did walking on cowrie shells come from? Where did that, I know I know you've always written. What began that path to the book?
As I said, I was always writing short stories. And some of those stories were like, when I was even working, I would sometimes just take classes. And it's been over some of those, like there's one story, I believe, that's over a decade old. There's one story that I actually got from working at the African magazine, right? So I wrote The Statistician's Wife because there were these articles going about all these nurses that were being murdered by their husbands, right? And
Okay.
it was a conversation around gender roles and changing types of, and just changing kind of from that transition from having a marriage and what marriage meant for people in Africa, and maybe coming to the States, and maybe a woman having more agency and a man feeling different and maybe emasculated. I ended up making the main character in that story a white man, but the stories at that time were unfortunately a lot of stories from people back home, and particularly people that I was reading about from Igbo culture. But I didn't want the story to become like, oh, look at those Africans. They just be like to do these kind of things, because this thing is happening universally, right? We see the rise of the manosphere, we see the rise of the incels, these are all things that have to do with like the changing nature of gender relations and men and women trying to figure out like what does it mean when one like a man is not the sole provider or the sole worker in the house. What does it mean when the woman may or may not want to have children. So all these things were things that I was interested in interrogating and talking about. And I got that from because at the African magazine we would get stories about like Minneapolis, large Somali population. I mean, I would just learn about different populations, like, other than like, my New York and DC upbringing, which were basically, DC was full of like my Cameroonian upbringing, Cameroons in DC. And then when I moved to New York, it's like, you guys know Nigerian people. You Igbos will always try to claim me and say I was Nigerian. I said, hey, just because I'm your color, I'm not Igbo, but it's okay. Ghanaians also claimed me because like my name was Nana. So, but yeah, because there was at that time there were particularly like a strong Nigerian population, strong Senegalese population in Harlem, but there's so many pockets of other diasporic, communities across the country. And being in that African magazine hub, I was learning about all these different things that were happening across the country in different pockets, and what that meant for people trying to navigate home culture, this culture, or kids like me who were born in this culture and are trying to kind of incorporate their traditions, learn from their parents with their own American upbringing. So that was some of the stories came about that way. Some of the stories, of course, like, writers, they write what they know, right? So we write things that interest us, or sometimes when I'm trying to figure out things that in my own life, I wrote one of my stories, Kinks, which is another older story, and the longest story is the last story in the book, and it's actually centered and ordered around the changing hairstyles of a Black woman who's at the center of the narrative. So her hair is braided and twisted and shorn, and all of that was like, hairstyles that I've had, and she's dealing with a very traditionalist relationship and trying to kind of navigate that. And that came out of my own personal history, right? Some things are like, I've never met a zombie, but I love zombies and I'm blurred. I'm a Black nerd. So I wrote a zombie romp, So I wrote stories that interested me, people that interested me, always with an eye towards showing us, Africans and Africans in diaspora, showing us in like our diverse modalities, showing how complex we are, showing that we're not just one thing. So like I got kids at, Cameroonian kids at Comic-Con, wearing, their cosplay outfits and, around Batmans and, stormtroopers, I've got us, I've got a Mami Wata story in there.
Always a Mami Water. Always a Mami Water.
I love me a Mami Wata, right? I feel like, Mami Wata is just like, anytime a woman had like power and she was sexy, it was like, that's a Mami Wata energy, right? So I feel like, I enjoyed and just had fun and played with, these things and wrote things that were interesting to me and had a lot of fun, always, always, always playing with language. So that's kind of how my stories and my collection came about.
Okay, so why don't you read us a snippet of the book? Show us the cover, because it was boldly green, and I kept wondering where that color came from. As a Nigerian, that's the first thing you see. Okay, walking on cowrie shells. What? Talk a little bit about that name and what that is. Then read
Oh,
us something.
all right. So the name Walking on Cowrie Shells is actually in that last and longest story. And I'm talking about that kind of liminal and like limbo space that you might feel like if you're trying to kind of figure out your identity, especially a lot of my stories are centered around people who have hyphenated American identities. So they're Cameroonian and American, or they're Nigerian and American, or I even have Korean Americans, right? So the plan was is like, the idea that sometimes you feel like you're not like fully some one thing or the other. You feel like you're tentative, like you're walking on
Okay.
eggshells. So walking on cowrie shells was just my play on like,
The
taking
eggshells.
it to the cowries in Africa, an African identity. So that was where that title came from. And yeah, that book cover with the green and everything. I love the green. It looks kind of like in your face, and I loved it, and I was very fortunate. My publishers let me be part of the like book design cover process. And I
Mm-hmm.
was very, very adamant. Please don't put any baobab trees on it. Please don't put deserts on it. Please don't give me an elephant. And, because I was just like, you know,
Stereotypes.
every
Stereotypes.
trope, every stereotype. And this is not to say that they would have done it, but I'm just saying I just had to cut that off at the pass. And I sent them this graphic that somebody had made online of all these, like, so-called African book covers, because this is
Mm.
just a very one note type of like essentializing idea. Like there's always some red dust floating around somewhere. I'm just like, you do realize there are other geographic climates, there's cities. And so anyway, they were very, very accommodating of me. So I got a cover that I felt was bold. It had that African piece to it, with those African cowrie shells that are in your face. If you
Mhm.
touch the book, they actually have textures, and and some are broken and some are whole. And I just felt it did me justice. So
Okay. So you just give us one story and then tell us how many other stories there are after you do the reading. Just, I guess, an excerpt.
okay, sure. So I'm going to read from what I call a story of Afro-Christian spiritual warfare. It's called The Devil is a Liar. We are looking at the story of a mother and daughter, and they're going through a difficult time. And as many of you know, if you know the African Charismatic Church, there's prophesiers, there's prophetic visions, there's
Mhm.
breaking ancestral curses. So I've got all that going on in here, and it's happening at a time when they are looking and searching for meaning in
Mhm.
the spiritual world. So here's The Devil is a Liar. There are hymns, there are hymns, there are hymns, there are hosannas, there are hallelujahs. There are some who are struck dumb in his presence, and those who are newborn linguists speaking in tongues. Eyes roll heavenward, limbs grow palsied, tears of joy, of penitence, of defiance are shed. Through this sound, this fury, Sister Gloria Ngassa, minister of music for the New Africa International Church of the Holy Redeemer Brooklyn Battalion, is praying fervently. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, O Crown Omega. Thank you, O Merciful One. Thank you. Thank you, O Heavenly Father. Glory glorifies and magnifies the Almighty for the miracle he has wrought in the life of her daughter, Temperance. Her voice, once whispery, rises, then rises again as she sways to the unsung chorus, moving the faithful 20-person flock present for service that Sunday morn. And faithful they are to this fledgling church. Its sanctuary, a dusty Brooklyn apartment, a donated space still undergoing a slow renovation that has spanned from Easter Sunday the year prior into an unknown future, unto the end of days, perhaps. The congregation is sanguine in their shared burdens. Tried and tested, they will not be found lacking. So one had to watch one step on the unfinished floorboards, a mere reminder that Jesus himself was a carpenter, a man who knew the grain of cedar, of poplar, of acacia, and even of the bitterest wormwood. So the single pane windows were unsealed, unshielding, their translucent tarps covered and fluttered in the draft like a host of angels' wings. Yes, the congregants of the New Africa International Church of the Holy Redeemer know they are blessed. Their leader, man of God, Pastor Godlove Akondang, had journeyed all the way from church headquarters in Cameroon to share his special anointing. That very moment, the good pastor is laying hands on the forehead of Brother William, timbering all 6 feet of the man into the waiting arms of Sister Anna, chanting, by the Spirit of Christ, by the body of Christ, by the blood of Christ, by the Spirit of Christ, by the body of Christ, by the blood of Christ. Raining down rapid fire, holy fire to break the ancestral curses that had kept the good brother from receiving his promotion. his increase. And now music, now songs of praise and thanksgiving. Glory steps forward. She pushes up her 1.5 drugstore glasses. Perhaps it was time for a 2 point. And peers down, and she peers down at her hand-assembled hymnal, the photocopied fruits of her labors to harvest gospel from back home from across the continent. Nigeria's Agatha Moses, Cameroon's Tribute Sisters, the Soweto Gospel Choir. Jesus, we love you, Lord. You don't make me wife better. We're going to thank you forevermore. Thank you, Baba. The congregation sings, held and swayed by the baton of Glory's pointer finger, tap, tap, tapping the time. Glory is gratified. There is no instrumental accompaniment to this chorus of warbling voices. Sister Anna is always flat. Yet she knows to her marrow that their voices are pleasing to He who mattered utmost. You see, Glory knows the power of church music. In over 30 years of searching for a church home, she had been to many houses of worship and had come to know the quality of a church not by the size of the hats on the church ladies' heads or the crisp white gloves of its ushers. Glory knows a church by its music, by the way its people raise their voices in gratitude, praise Jesus. She knows the Pentecostals love a good tambourine, a jangly rejoicing. Catholics crave holy hush, hums of contemplation, while the Southern Baptists were one for gamboling and holy bowling. Lovers of big voice belters, soul claps, and organ riffs that settled on the sermons of their high-stepping reverends like a hype man's cape across the shoulder blade. For glory, for his glory, the music had to be especially right that day, because she is bursting with a mighty testimony. Amen. Her daughter Temperance, whose belly had lain fallow for over a decade, was now over 3 months pregnant. 5 months ago, in this very church, the man of God had laid hands on her visiting daughter and he had cast out of the spirit of barrenness. Hallelujah. After, he would pull Glory aside and speak to her of serpents, of writhing knots in her daughter's insides, and of the agent of the enemy who had tried to steal her poor child's womb, and the spiritual warfare he had waged to protect it. Later, her daughter would tell her about those snakes, and she would tell Temperance, there were some twisty fists that were pummeling you from within. Oh, Mom, Temperance had said, sighing, I saw a specialist. Those were just fibroids. Thank you.
Ooh, loaded. You know, it's interesting. I had a conversation yesterday with a young woman who is studying the relationship between Africans and Christianity through, and in particular through music, and how, you know, how overpowering the music has been in the journey of African lives, you know. And I actually suggested she talk with a friend of mine who is looking at the I guess in Tanzania, there was a series of songs that had some German in them.
Interesting.
So, you know, it's an interesting, what I would say, it's an interesting combination of two cultures in the African society. So when you get into the church, you see both having such an intense effect. Did you grow up in the church?
I did. And but I've had like a very kind of like, you know, I'm very like my mother and I pray every night, and I call myself very spiritual because I'm not a person who wants to use church and religion as a cudgel to make other people feel less than. So my mother actually practiced Nichiren Shoju Buddhism for a while. We used to chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. I mean, I'm a person who's open to world religions, but I found that, like, you know, going back to the church of my childhood, going back to a love of Christ has been worked for me. But I'm not a person who thinks that, okay, that, you know, my God is better than everybody else's God, you know.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you talk about like, religion, because that story and like, so many people came to know the church because of missionaries, right? My
Yeah,
parents, both went to missionary schools. So getting your education was, part and parcel came like, the Bible and your book, right? In your book
yeah,
learning. So that is kind of how we came to be, in have this kind of religious kind of tradition. And so a lot of the songs that people know from childhood were, even in learning in school, were church songs, and they were like in German, like you're saying, and in the languages of these colonial masters at the time. And so there are actually Bibles in like, in various in Cameroon that are in the dialects, of people, because they were the first people who were interacting with these missionaries. And just a little aside, if people want, if you're interested in seeing the music that I have that goes along with these various stories, I actually made a soundtrack. It's on my
mm,
website. And so if you go to my website, you'll see like Explore Walking on Cowrie Shells, and there's a soundtrack, a Pidgin English dictionary,
ah,
and there's also a side blog, which is
yes.
basically riffing on one of the stories, like talking about dating African men in the DMV.
Oh,
That's District of District, District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia, for those who don't know. But the music actually, that's on like this SoundCloud list that I made, takes like some of those songs that I mentioned. Like I got the Moses songs in there. Let me see if I
mhm.
can pull it up so you can like,
Okay.
see.
What's your website so that I can post it right here?
Okay, excellent. My website is Nana Nkweti. That's N is in Nancy, A, N is in Nancy again, A, NKWETI. So it's basically what the name that you see on this book, Nana Nkweti
.com.
.com. Yes.
I'm posting that.
Yes, and like I say, like going there and then you click on explore, like it's right there in the top of the page, explore, and then you can see my soundtracks, and they take you through, like all the various, it takes you to the soundtrack, and then you can look at the list. I made a soundtrack for every story. There are 10, you asked me about the number of stories in the book.
Yeah.
There are 10 stories in the book. Well, I should say 9 stories in the book, and one prose poem, which is Schoolyard Cannibal, which just like, it came about that I tried to write it as a story, and it ended up being a much more, kind of melodic, but like into like excerpted type of like, fractured
Mm,
piece, because that was the feelings of the narrative. It's flashbacks to a young woman's life growing up in America and trying to navigate all the microaggressions that come, at different points in your life when you're African growing up here. If people, are not woke and don't know better, that
mhm.
kind of stuff, like, oh, you speak good English for African, or those little things like that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, so that one is a prose poem. But on that site, on the nananquitty.com/soundtrack, you can click through to The Devil's a Liar, and The Devil's a Liar has a number of the songs, like, that your friend might be interested in because of looking at music and the
Mm,
African, like, I've got even like P Squares when they were still together, the brothers,
yeah.
like, Easy O, because that was like, like all about, praising God. And Sarkody's on there, and let's
So
see.
me. So in some ways, music influenced the book, and I guess I would say you are very much like a. I'm going to use that word that Africans sometimes have issues with, an Afropolitan. Uh,
Oh,
yes, but it's how do you talk about African culture, but you're modern, and that's usually what I always use as the context of that conversation. What do you consider yourself? Because when I hear you, I hear an African feminist, I hear an Afropolitan, I hear a nerd, which is now called a blurred, okay, which is a black nerd. Talk about I mean, I'm using words as, language to sort of trigger some conversation, but sometimes people don't want labels because those are all different kinds of labels.
I mean, I feel like, never have we lived at a time where all these things, identities can exist together, right? Like I felt
Yeah.
always felt like my family and my parents and you know, they allowed us to be kind of Whitman-esque. We could contain multitudes. Like
Yeah.
the time when you had to be one thing is over, right? Like I think
Mhm.
like, you know, we are an increasingly hashtag world, right? You can be hashtag feminist, hashtag blurred, you can be hashtag, you know, African, and all these kind of identities can coexist. Like I told you a little bit about my own background growing up and moving around, from moving across continents, moving across languages. That has made me such an open person that, like, you know, that I couldn't help but be, you know,
Mm.
be open to so many different. With music, I'm open to music. I have eclectic taste in music. I have eclectic taste in art. I have
Mm.
eclectic tastes in a variety of things, because that was how I was raised. Just, you know, like, we're open to the world, and
All
so
right. Let me test that curiosity. You're in
okay.
Alabama. Which Dolly Parton song are you listening to? Which one did you
Oh,
grow up with?
okay, so I grew up, like, we did have Dolly Parton. So Kenny Rogers, Willie
Absolutely.
Nelson,
Yes.
Dolly Parton, those were our people, like, you know, back in the day, like the old school country people like that. Like if you ask me
Yeah.
about like modern day country music, I could name like maybe the top, like the top 40 kind of people like that and
Yeah.
everything. But I remember like singing, like I can sing Jolene, 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 I'm begging you, please don't take my man, you know. And then that,
Okay. So
you
that's
know, so we
that's
had
that's
Loretta
the
Lynn, we had all of
mhm.
that, you know, back
So
in the
that's
day.
the country sound. Now let's shift over to Fela and African music in that sense, in that era. Talk about what.
Oh my goodness. Oh, but of course, you know, I literally have a fella song title in there, Dance the Fire Dance, in my book, right? You know,
Mhm, mhm.
from like, if people say I be lady, you know, lady, like, so I'm just like
Yes.
talking, because there's one girl who's trying to navigate her African identity. And I remember like Somi actually did a response to, you know, kind of fella, like the whole lady, you know, call on for dance, ego dance, lady dance.
Hmm.
African mama got to dance, ego dance, the fire dance. So I'm just like, okay, this girl is dancing her fire dance, you know, you know. But so like, you know, at that time, like what was I listening to back then? So of course, like in Cameroon, Soul Makossa, like Manu
Yeah.
Dibango,
Yeah.
um Fela. I don't even know whether Fela was contemporaries with all these people, but it's, like I got my Ancien Makossa list, which is like for us, it's like Manu Dibango, Sanfran Thomas, DDA Yango, like Prince Yango, like so many people, like, you know, that I grew up, and for some reason, like also Zouk was very, which is from the
Hmm.
Caribbean, was very big in Africa at that time. So I had my Zouk love, and then we had, I just came across a Brenda Fassi song from back in the day that I forgotten. Like, so, but Kassav, it was big
Hmm.
for us. You know, a lot of South African music was big, you know, like those back in the day, you know, Umkumboti songs, and like, you know, and Sweet Mother, I know go forget
Forget you.
you,
Yeah, I
you
grew up
know,
with
so that was my
that.
childhood, right? You know,
Yeah.
and so
So talk a little bit about, teaching, because that's the next phase or is the current phase of your life. You're teaching at University of Alabama. You arrived pre-COVID and then went into shutdown. How are you sort of functioning through this? Because I think it's been for everyone who has sort of gone through this, everyone as an artist, as a creative, there are different ways you evolve.
yeah, honestly, I came here what we pre-COVID and went to the campus and did my whole campus tour, because they have you do job talks, you meet students, you teach a
Mhm.
sample class, you know, you get you're interviewed by a committee. And that was like, you know, me seeing Alabama like in the campus. Now I get hired, and then I come down here in the middle of COVID, right? And
Ooh.
like schools have already closed down. They've gone to a remote learning system. So by the fall, like, you know, we're in full blown COVID system. So when people ask me, how is Alabama? I'm like, you mean my house, my pandemic pod, my apartment, you know, it's getting a bit better because I've been vaccinated. So now I'm out and about in these Alabama streets, but you know, it's still like I have my first academic year, I taught remotely the entire time, you know.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting this fall to go back to campus and actually to kind of be in the classroom setting. But it was my salvation and saving grace teaching, because like, I was teaching creative writing and literature and had these wonderful graduate students who take literature and writing seriously. So it allowed me to kind of have that kind of built-in kind of
So,
create, kind of,
yeah,
oh, yeah, but my own writing though,
yes.
so speaking about my own writing, right? I came here, but I was also in the middle of doing edits, final edits for the Walking on
For the
Calorie
book? Okay.
shows.
Okay.
So like a lot of my like emotional energy was trying to battle, you know, like COVID. Like, we were all going through it as artists. I don't think like, there was an artist as well. I actually had to kind of at some point like turn off the news and say, I'm gonna just watch the news. I mean, we were watching it every day, right? Like I was glued to like, Cuomo's like, daily reports. We were all
Briefing.
going
Yeah.
through it. We wanted to know all the briefings, we wanted to know every single thing that was happening. But by the time we were living with, with coronavirus, by the time I got here, I was just like, I need to preserve some of that creative energy and that kind of space for my soul. So I started like, slowly start, just focusing on my book edits, slowly started writing pieces, new pieces. And it's only really now this summer and maybe a little bit of the end of this fall that I started writing new stories, started working on my sci-fi novella that I was working on since like years ago. I started, revisiting my novel that had been like on hiatus, and it's only like now I feel like like, like I've been hibernating in some ways creatively, because a lot of that energy was going towards getting this book baby launched into the world. But I think like a lot of artists, we're still like, I'm using like now my writing to kind of make sense of what we just went through, right? And the funny thing is I actually have a story in the book which is talking about a pandemic. It just happens to be zombieism, right?
Okay. Interesting. So, talk a little bit, I mean, about the book coming out. I mean, I looked at all the reviews. I mean, there has been, and as you said it, there has been a tremendous I would say a tremendous response, very good response, and just positive. I mean, it's very, there's always, as someone who at some point had friends who used to do book reviews. I always used to tell them, why do you have to write anything negative? Why don't you just write the good stuff about the book? Your book has had almost review, and it's interesting because um, you're the second Cameroonian author out at the same time.
Mhm.
Africans never. There's only one African in the New York Times at the same time. So this was to me an amazing place to be. Um, you know, and I'm absolutely amazed by all of it. I'm happy. There's a certain level of joy to see somebody give birth to something, and
Thank you.
and you see it and you're saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. So, for me, it was like, okay, she got the New York Times and it was excellent. And I was like, wow, how does that feel as a Black woman, as a Cameroonian woman, and a daughter of immigrants? Because I
So I
think,
would,
yeah, go ahead.
oh no, I would definitely say like what you're saying is very, very correct about reviews. They tend to like, there's always like something glowing and then they jab, jab, jab you in the end. Like they just
Yes.
because I mean, reviews, they try to be like balanced and try to kind of give you the good, the bad, and the ugly. So, and I've understood that for the longest time. But
Mhm.
because like, this giving birth to a book is is literally like my child, right? Like, so people
Yeah.
ask me, which stories do I like? And I'm like, are you trying to Sophie's choice me? I cannot choose one Pekin over the other Pekin. Like, it just doesn't, it's not going to happen. So all these are my babies in this book. So it's a very personal thing. So
Yeah.
I actually was, don't even read reviews. And I actually had a social media person and a publicist who would just excise the part that I could put in, could tweet and everything like that. But it just so happened that my publicist was off, they were off, the week before the New York Times review came out. So now I started reading reviews, but then because of that, I don't want to live or die by anybody's
Yeah.
opinion of my work, right? I feel like I put that work in the world and it stands as it stands. I'm proud of it. I'm proud I did what I wanted to do on the page. I took no prisoners. I did what I want. I mean, like when I say I did what I wanted to do, I put my zombies in there. People say, "Oh, you got to write only literary fiction. I got to be realist fiction." I said, "No, I'm a child of folks, juju is a thing. So I'm gonna put my
Yeah.
Mummy Waters in there. I'm gonna put my zombies in there because I'm blurred. I'm gonna put some illustrations of comic from Comic-Con, and there's gonna be some graphic elements in there because I like that. So I feel like I did what I wanted to do. And I'm so thankful for people who have reviewed my book, um, so many like universally raves, just great reviews, but I know that it could have gone the other way. And I feel like, as artists, and this is my advice to any artist out there, and any writer, anybody who's doing something in the creative space, we can't allow these things to define who we are and what we do on the page. I'm thankful that even my New York Times review was done by another writer, a Black woman. It was done by a woman who was also a short story collection writer, so she understands that space. And that's what you hope that people are coming with their highest intentions, right? When they're writing your reviews, and that they understand the space that you're creating from. And so I've just been fortunate, and I'm happy. And my mom will be like, girl, we've been praying on these breakthroughs. So, it's just a matter of time, So and as a Cameroonian woman in particular, shout out to Mbola Boué, whose book is also out as well. It really made me happy to see that we could both exist in this space, and it wouldn't be I think I mentioned to you that I have been in meetings with agents before, who've been like, oh, we already have an African person on our roster. And I'm just like, do you know that Africa is not a country? Do you know how big the continent is? Let alone two Cameroonians at the same time, women, so I think it just says that we've come a long way. We've got a long way to go yet. I'm not going to be like, kumbaya and saying everything is fixed and everything. But I think it just shows that we've come a long way, that, that we are in a space where we can talk about literature from women of color, from African women, from the continent, from the diaspora, and people are just like, oh, there's two of them, and it's not like some big shocker, and the world is not tumbling down. That we can contain multitudes and write from different perspectives, even if we came from the same village. I was just like, come on, you guys, get it together. Like, you mean to tell me like somebody from New York is going to be saying, I'm from Brooklyn, and you're going to speak like, Brooklyn is going to be like, forget about it. And like, Upper East Side, like, if you can understand that New York is different from, is Manhattan and Brooklyn and Queens, if you can understand that, you can understand that, let alone a whole continent. So anyway.
All right. Music can take you places. I'm going to read some of the comments and questions. It has always been a part of our worship. Many times the music is more impactful than what comes from the pulpit. So churches capitalize on this. My question is, do your friends and family accuse you of telling their stories without their permission?
That is funny. So this is the funny thing. I have a really great imagination. So I haven't felt the need to I draw inspiration from my life, but I have never written about any one particular family member. Because I come from a big African family. Both my grandparents, my grandfathers were polygamous. I got cousins and cousins and cousins for days. I will never, it's just, I don't want anybody accosting me at any family meeting saying that, oh, this one is me. I know that you wrote this about me. And we got I say sometimes our stories and our families the truth is stranger than fiction. If I was writing the actual stories of my own family, you would say you was like, oh, this girl has gone too far. She's gone too far. Hey, it's too much, like there's just some ridiculous, ridiculous stuff. There's like, like it'd be like Game of Thrones type of stuff, like, that kind
Yeah.
of family stuff. But no, like nobody's accused me of doing that and everything. And thankfully my family and my extended family from all these, like, like I say, from these large clans have been very supportive. So I've been fortunate in that respect. Thank you for your question.
Okay, the reason she's asking is because people always assume it's about them. The stories resonate with all of us. All right, next question. Are you going to commission an audible version of your book? Please do.
So is that okay? So I've been getting like two requests, right? The Audible version and the audiobook. I just talked to my publisher. I was just asking them when are that supposed to be coming out, because there's an ebook that came out the very same day the print book came out.
Okay.
But the audiobook is supposed to be happening, and people keep on asking me, "Are you going to read it?" Because they seem to
Yeah.
like when I'm reading it. Like, and I'm
Yeah.
just like, I can't do a Kentucky accent, and I got a Kentucky, man from the hollers of Kentucky in there. And as much as I thought about reading it and I wanted to do it initially, I was just like, maybe I should let a professional actor or actors, handle some of these accents. But I just asked my publisher once again, who they've been very accommodating. Shout out to Grey Wolf. I just asked them, hey, when it comes to this Pidgin English, when it comes to like, I need to speak to these actors, make sure they say these things correctly, make sure they like the French, even sometimes people, sometimes you watch a movie and sometimes you're like, why are these people with French? They can't even speak French like correctly. So I'm
Lovely.
just like,
Yeah.
I'm helping speak pronounce the French, Pidgin English, even like African American vernacular English, aka Ebonics. I'm just like, just because I wrote drawers doesn't mean it's not draws. Like, you need to know how to say it's draws. Like, so there's some things I'm gonna have to
I
explain.
mean, as an African woman, and I will tell you, I think you should read the African parts. Because in some ways, I mean, I understand that you don't the Kentucky accent and all of that stuff, but I think that there's more power in your voice.
Mm.
You
Well, that's
know?
what people keep on saying to me. So I don't know what's going to happen, because you're like the third person. Like, I've been doing a number of readings, and every time I do these readings, somebody says, "Are you going to read the audio book?" And I'm just like, "Uh-oh, I'm in trouble now." So,
Well, but I think, and I say this particularly when you're talking about Pidgin English.
mhm.
I think that, okay, here's a couple of differences. In listening to your Pidgin English, that is Cameroonian, and I'm hearing the echoes of my Nigerian Pidgin English, it's very different. The nuances are very different. And the idea that somebody else is going to do those nuances, you know, even when you were, we're going to do another section in the book, but even the dialogue around the church and the music and all of that commentary, sometimes it's, for those of us who are readers, I prefer to hear the author's voice,
I know that I've
honestly.
been hearing that. Like, so we'll see what happens. Depends also, because I'm a busy professor. I'm about to start teaching in like 3 weeks, like 3 weeks, 2.5, so we'll see what happens, because I've been getting that feedback, and I do love and cherish. I think Pidgin English is like, I have friends who can tell stories in Pidgin English, and I feel like it's even sweeter than the Pidgin that it is in
Yeah.
standard grammar. So like, I do have concerns about those things, and I have it actually some Cameroonian actor friends, who like, who can do that kind of code switching like I do. So I
Okay.
feel like if I'm working with people who like can code switch and can, you know, go into like, we go to thank you forevermore. If they can do it, if they can do
Hmm.
that, if they can go to hana, if they can do that, and then they can do the Kentucky holler accent, and they can do like, how you doing? They can do that, like
Yeah.
they can
Yeah.
go up and like all these
But,
different places, because that's my life, that's my existence. Growing up in
yeah,
DC,
but I
and
think you
yeah.
I think you do code switch as an author, and because you're telling stories about people,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to embody them, and language is the best way to embody them, voice. Um anyway, any other questions from the audience, or what do you want to do? We have 10 minutes about that left. I know you said how can I talk for an hour? That was the conversation we had, and I said you'll be surprised how fast an hour goes when you're in conversation. So, what short version of the another story will you read? What do you think you're
Okay.
gonna say? Yeah.
Let me read something from the I'll read the second volume from It Takes a Village, Some Say, and that's a story that is told in two sections. And this is the story that like I submitted to the King Prize. So I read that and kind of give you a sense of, and this story is told from the perspective of a young girl who was adopted by a mixed race, uh, a family, like an American family, Cameroonian man married to American woman, white American woman, and she's kind of grabbing back her own self, her own narrative, because the first part of the story was told from their perspective and what they thought and what they felt when they were adopting her. All right, I'm gonna take a sip of water because my mom says, like, between
Yep.
these chats, water it up.
Okay.
And it's weird too because when I'm speaking to you, like sometimes it's very easy for me to go into the voices, but sometimes it takes me a while. So I'll see
Okay.
how this goes because when I do the Kentucky guy, like the register of my voice changes and I try to get a little drawl in there. And this one is a Cameroonian girl, but she's also been living in America. So she's got a little bit of a difference in the way she speaks. All
Okay.
right. I give good read, mais je suis rien comme des autres. Nothing like them. Those poor telethon kids you scribble letters to and force feed poto poto rice for just 10 cents a day. Fly haloed, swollen tum-tums begging for your pretext dollars. You give and you give and you give again. Hashtag save our kids. Hashtag because you care. No, I'm nothing like them. But I made your heartstrings twang with tabloid tales of my liberation from the Silikis, who took me when I was just a small titi and made me their girl. I was 13 years old when she came for me, Mrs. Fontap, aka Ngando, aka Ndukong. First choice had been my follow back, Arabella. Last cocoa in our family, age 8 but could pass for the type of cuddly 5-year-old you and your madame know from commercials. We're happy children, TM, eat Cheerios, TM, and Lucky Charms, TM, and all the world is shine shine. Bella was très mignon, a doll baby with long, silky Hausa hair and a sweet as bonbon manner, so unlike my own, my mama's Wahala Pikin. Perfect, perfect, said Mrs. Dukong. Her eyes are squirming and squinting and calculating. At the center of our parquet front parlor, Bella was twirling slowly for inspection in a dress Maman had fashioned from the remnants of an old opica dress, its tattered lace made fine again by her hand. Maman just sat there next to Mrs. Dukong, quiet as a mumu, head hanging low like overripe popo. I was setting the table for our guest meal, and my ever-watchful grandsir, Frida, monitored from the kitchen doorway, neither in nor out. Does she speak proper English? Asked Mrs. Ducombe, suddenly sniffing her nose as if illiteracy had a pit toilet stench and we reeked. Do we speak proper English? Swine beef. I wanted to tell that fatty bobolo, no son be lame. My family had lived in Douala for 10 years now since my mom had come to make market. So we spoke proper English and proper French and pidgin and franglais to boot. Hey, not like Mrs. Dukon with her pili pili bush pronunciation grinding up proper into proper. I looked to Frida, who looked at me and shook her head no. So I folded my arms and sucked my teeth. Mrs. Dukon gave me some kind of eye. Do you have something to say? So, what is that one's name again, Madeleine? She turned and asked Mama, who, without lifting her gaze from the ground, said, Don't mind her, Madame. That one is always talking. I only wanted to say that food is ready, Tantine. I kept that lie with my best imitation Bella curtsy. No, no, Mrs. Dukon replied, I get plenty of and them. I don't fit chop. At this, Mama finally lifted her head, and we all stared. For weeks, she had been preparing. Shay, Frida, have you dry cleaned this floor? See me this girl. You want my madam to think we have no manners? Wahala pikin, carry that new serving dish and go chook am up for highway. Arabella no fit reach am. She had been bartering her skills for weeks to make this dinner perfect, to buy gari that was a fine gold dust, miraculously weevil-free sef. For goat meat to put in the egusi stew, the butcher's wife had received 3 Flisco Dutch wax attires, sewn gratuit. What made this woman? What made her too good for the bongo fish we usually ate it with? And why did we have to make show for people who were begging us for a child? People who were teething my sister. You'll not sit and eat small, Mama asked. I made the food special, secret family ingredient. No, I cannot, Mrs. Dukan repeated. Mama frowned. We smiled, savoring the thought, licking our lips, our belays biting. Very well, Madeleine, Mrs. Duncan finally said, sighing. I can see you went to some trouble. Pack the food. I will taste it and dash it to the rest of my night watch. She smiled at her generosity. I was vexed. This woman with all her joro jowls and chins wobbling. Had she ever missed a meal in her whole life? Making me a langa dog in my own house. I took the plate to the kitchen as instructed, but I scraped half into a bowl for my sisters and me to eat behind the house. The rest I put in Mama's best new dish. I mixed in some tap water to puff it up again. I placed it on the floor between my legs, and I squatted to add in my own secret family ingredient. All right, thank you.
So 4 years in Cameroon and a lifetime of mother and family.
Yes.
You are as Nigerians would say, you are a proper Cameroonian now.
Okay.
Because the words, I think we have similar backgrounds in the sense that when you grow up around African literature, and even some of the words langa, bongo fish, I was just like, oh, what was a bongo fish like? And I was trying to remember what it looked like, what it smelled like, because I think African literature has always been that. It's been very descriptive and
Amazingly so.
yeah, and animative in terms of around food. Talk about food, because I know you're probably like me, a foodie.
I am not a foodie because I have a terrible sense of smell. Like they say, like
Ooh,
80% of your smell, your sense of taste is
it
in
smell.
your nose. And
Mm,
because I have always had allergies and, like I eat food. If I was a robot, like you could give me a pill to give me food, I
yeah.
would be fine with that. But I do love bacon. I love I do love like food for me is evocative back home, especially certain meals. So
Hmm.
because I'm an African girl and because I'm a firstborn and the first child, I could of course cook. So
Yeah.
I know how to cook. So it's interesting because like Nigeria, you guys are our neighbors, so we do share some pidgin English words, and we also share some dishes, right?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
but we just have different names for them and everything. So like I can go to these like if I go to like a Nigerian like African food store, as long as I see what I'm looking at, I can say, oh, that is what we call this,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that is but food for me was very synonymous, of course, with the maintaining of culture, especially growing up here in the United States. But what made you different is you had your agusi soup,
Yeah.
and like if I say pumpkin seed to some people, they will know it, like, or they say,
Yes.
but like, egusi was pumpkin seed that's ground up, people have that, like, we have like our peppers, the love of pepper, the love of like certain spices that were just part of our growing up, so egusi, okra stew, and dole, all these vegetables and everything that were indigenous to Cameroon, some of them also nearby, like
Yeah.
you guys have, we call it koki, but you guys call it moi moi. So it's like,
Yeah.
but it's the same, it's exactly the same food,
Same thing. Yeah.
So like it's so food was very much part of like, cultural identity and sense of Cameroon for me growing up, and continues to be. Like my mom, there's no like African store here in Tuscaloosa, but my mom has sent me like, care packages of like, granite is peanut here, but I can buy natural peanut butter, but like she gets me the ground granite from the African store and sends it to me so I can make granite stew. So I have like these little African packages of like, like, the things to make a true soup. These are the true soup spices. These are the spices for this, so they're still very much part of like, when I want to feel like back home, then that's when I make those meals. So
Okay. I think we're at 8:01 in New York and 7:01 in Alabama. Nana, much love and thank you.
thank you so
I,
much for having me. And this was such a pleasure, chatting with you and, getting a chance to kind of like reconnect with my African magazine family. So thank you so much for this, and to all
it's
the people who came and joined us, like, from all over. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
and thank you all for watching and listening. I know I have been sort of elusive in terms of doing my weekly, but I think I will probably try and do this every 2 weeks. And I think I've been sort of re-inspired to do this with writers because I think I've done a section with filmmakers, and then I will do another section with musicians before I return to artists again. Good evening and have a wonderful day. Bye
All
bye.
right. Bye, everyone.